one of the reasons that the Jewish Collaborative of Orange County creates this Monday morning forum for learning is to have a chance to expose different groups and followers of scholars to some learning that they might not otherwise have access to. So this is an opportunity for us to bring Mike Mymon into Mike is somebody I've known for many years, a former congregant of mine and now a rabbi. And just to bring him to the attention of a larger audience, there are some people who do watch this on Facebook or listen to our recordings after the fact. And of course, it's an opportunity to welcome other people from the community, like people from Congregation Shalom, into the Jewish Collaborative, menu of offerings. And we hope that you will join us for other learning that's going to be going on for the rest of the fall. I want to tell you about our next two scholars. For the next 4 weeks, Rabbi Suzanne Singer, who's a magnificent teacher, is going to be doing four sessions on the book of Job. And she's right now teaching our Intro to Judaism class, and she's outstanding. So I hope you'll consider joining us for that. After that, we have a really exciting lecture from Pennsylvania, Dr. Harley Lachter, who many years ago was a CSP scholar for a month in Orange County. He's become a good friend, and he's going to be doing something focused on mysticism, Kabbalah, and Mormonism, which is actually his focus, is sort of the relationship between the Mormon faith and Kabbalah, which is quite fascinating. That's what he wrote his dissertation on. So anyway, Harley will be with us, and we're scheduling some wonderful scholars out through December. So please consider joining us and registering and being part of it. And again, for all of you who support this opportunity through a donation, we are most grateful. And I'll put a link in the chat to anyone who'd like to be able to make a donation after the class. And without further ado, I'm turning it over to Rabbi Mike.
Thank you, Rabbi Moshe. I have a PowerPoint presentation. I don't have to put it on the screen, but if you would like...
I'm making you a co-host, so you can do that.
Okay. And I need to remember it's with share. I probably will remove it until we get to a certain point that it's necessary to have it there. Let's see if I... Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. We're talking today about Maimonides. But before we get going, I want to tell you a little story, a joke really, that I heard recently. I even shared it a few weeks ago. As a guy named Moshe, coming to the rabbi and say, Rabbi, I didn't say Birkat Hamazon last week after a meal. And the rabbi say, why? And Moshe said, because I didn't wash my hand before I ate. So the rabbi said, that's already 2 sins, and you still haven't told me why. So Moshe said, because the food was not kosher. And the rabbi is like, why was the food not kosher? And he said, because the restaurant was not kosher. The rabbi is fuming now, and he's like, why are you eating in a non-kosher restaurant? And Moshe said, where am I going to find a kosher restaurant open on Yom Kippur? The Moshe we're going to talk about today. The Moshe we're going to talk about today is a little different. We call him Maimonides in most of the Anglo-Saxon languages. In Hebrew, he's called Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon, the son of Maimon. Rambam, in short. In Arabic, they call him Abu Imram Musa bin Maimun. So you heard earlier that we have about an hour, and it's probably going to be a disservice to cover Maimonides in an hour. But we'll do the best we can and cover some of those things. To get some of those disclaimers out of the way, I'll tell you that when I was about 13, I found out that my family is related to Maimonides. Just before my bar mitzvah, my grandfather died. His brother, Rabbi Maimon, that was a chief rabbi in the Negev, stood for him. We couldn't do the regular thing at the reception hall with the party, so my parents rented a bus, and all of us went to the Western Wall, where my bar mitzvah took place, where I got the first aliyah. Rabbi Maimon, my dad's uncle, my grandfather's brother, officiated the whole thing. In the bus, on the way to Jerusalem, my mom's dad, who was a Zohar scholar of sort, he was studying the Zohar all inside and out. And Rabbi Maimon, my other grandfather's brother, were having a discussion about the Zohar. And I figured, that's a good opportunity to ask the question that was on my mind. And I went to him and I said, how did you go 800 years back to find it related to Maimonides? And he said to me, Yehudim asherim ikvot, Jews leave footprints behind. I was 13. And so he smiled in the rabbinical school in the early 1930s. His grandfathers were alive and they remembered their grandfathers. So he already had everything going back to the beginning of the 19th century. And he only had 600 years more to go, as if 600 years is nothing. And he explained that most of the work that he did was in Tunisia, where that part of, and he explained that in his finding, Maimonides, Maimon, the last name, was in Tunisia for 650 years. He only had to go back about 150 years outside of Tunisia. So he went to Gniza, of Jewish records, in Egypt, in Morocco, in Tunisia, etc. And he also visited cemeteries because we have birth certificate, bar mitzvah certificate, death certificate, things of that nature. But also on our graves, we write so-and-so, the son of so-and-so. So he literally went backward. And when he got to the point that he couldn't find the next grave, he would go and pay the person that is guarding the grave half of a bill. Let's say it's a $50 bill. It will cut it in half and hand it to him and say, when you find the father of this one, then I will give you the other half. And a couple of days later, he found it. So 650 years were in Tunisia. We knew where Maimonides came from, where he died, where he's buried. He had to fill in a gap for 150 years. And that's how we did it. That's how he literally built the family tree. Maimonides was born in Cordova, Spain, on Passover Eve. It was March 30th, 11. He died about 69 years later, at age 69, on December 13, 1204. He died in Fostat, is Old Cairo. I'm going to get to the end when we get to the end, but his mother died when she gave him birth. So he was raised by his father and grandfather, that is to say by his grandmother, in Cordova, Spain. When he was born, Spain was under the control of the Umayyad Muslim Caliphate. The Umayyad Muslim Caliphate was very open-minded. They allowed Christians, they allowed Jews in Spain, and they also allow art and science, or they tolerated it in a way. So it was really a good time for the Jews in Spain. I'm going to take kind of a step aside and bring to your attention that from the time the first temple was destroyed, 586 before the Common Era, and for a period of about years, Babylon was the center of Judaism. All the great yeshivas, all the great rabbis, all the big writings came from Babylon. All the influential rabbis that pretty much kind of control the direction Judaism is going were in Babylon. But about the time Maimonides was born, 1,000 years ago, there was a shift. The shift was from Babylon to Western Europe, France and Spain. Think of people like Rashi, France, or his grandson, Rabbi Gershon, who actually banned polygamy in Judaism 1,000 years ago. Think about Rabbi like Ibn Virol or Shmuel Anagid, giants among the Spanish Jews. So there was a shift from Babylon to Spain and France. That shift remained in Europe for probably 900 years. Think about rabbis like Ovadia Sforno, 500 years ago in Italy, or the Baal Shem Tov, and all the Hasidic movement rabbis that followed him in the Eastern European and Central European countries. Since 1948, the most influential rabbis are actually in Israel. Hasidic rabbis and many of the influential rabbis of Judaism moved to Israel. So now we're coming back. It's not clear who were the teachers of Maimonides. He never wrote about it. It's assumed that his father and grandfather were primarily his teachers. That's not to take away from the fact that he probably taught himself. At age 19, Maimonides had a complete control of the Torah, the Mishnah, and the Gemara, the Talmud. Complete control. It's amazing for somebody at that age to have so much knowledge, so much control thoroughly. And that came true in many of his writing. His father was a dayan, a judge, a religious judge. His father was Rabbi Maimon ben Yosef, the son of Joseph. And his father was not just a dayan, he was also a teacher. So most people assume that Maimonides was taught by his dad. Sadly, he never wrote, so there was never really credit as to what and when. Maimonides wrote that he is related to the house of David. That is King David in the Bible. So when you think about King David, the Dayan, also a religious judge, and Maimonides, the son of two religious judges, you kind of see the background that Maimonides attributed to himself. When Maimonides was 12, Spain was invaded by a different caliphate called the Almohads. They came from North Africa. They were not open-minded like the Umayyad Caliphate, and they basically started to ban religion, art that is not Muslim. And so the Jews and the Christians felt the pressure. The Jews felt it much more. Maimonides' family, when he wanted to move about Spain, but all those bad decrees kept following them, so they crossed the bay into Morocco, Fez, Morocco. That's where Maimonides learned medicine. Maimonides was also a physician. But the Almohad Caliphate really controlled that territory of North Africa and the Iberian Peninsula, Spain and Portugal, really hard and were very extreme. Some say that, or compare the Almohads to the Talibans today, that kinds of an extreme. They don't allow anything, they don't want anything other than Islam or their version of Islam. So when 1147, at age 12, the Almohad came, the Maimonides family moved. First, they moved to Fez. I said that's where he learned medicine. Then from there, they moved to Tunisia. It's not clear where, although some think it's Sfax. Then they moved to the city of Akko, North Israel, along the shore. It's very easy to explain because from Tunisia, if you take the Phoenician route, shipping route, you just kind of hug the shore of the Mediterranean and you land at Akko, a port town in the north of Israel. From there, the family moved to Jerusalem. Not much was going on in Jerusalem. Jerusalem was in ruin for a long time. And so if I jump forward, when Maimonides came to Jerusalem, he couldn't even find a minyan to pray. So he moved back to the Galilee region, where most of the Jews. Incidentally, when we talk about the Jerusalem Talmud, it was mostly rabbis from the Galilee. So we call it Jerusalem Talmud, but really most of the yeshivas were in the Galilee. And that's where that section of Judaism, the Jerusalem Talmud, unlike the Babylonian Talmud that carries more weight and came from Babylon, that's where the Jerusalem Talmud was put together inside or in that region of Israel, the north part. Up to about 100 years ago, when a family had a son that is in Hebrew called an Ilui, a really brilliant child, they, for lack of a better term, designated that child to be a rabbi, to study Judaism, to immerse his life in Judaism. And the other children supported that son and his family. David ben Maimon was the brother of Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon. Since Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon, Maimonides, was designated an Ilui, clearly by 19, he mastered the Torah and the Talmud and everything else that was written to that point. His brother was supporting him and his family. So David became a gold and silver merchant, and he supported him. This went on for a long time, but in the last 100 years or so, this changed. David took a trip to Southeast Asia to buy gold and silver. That ocean vessel, if you could call it so, went down in the Indian Ocean. And when he went down in the Indian Ocean, so did the family fortune, because he took a lot of money with him to buy gold and silver, and even more. He also took with him money that other merchants him to buy gold and silver for them. So in an instant, not only that the big supporter, financial supporter of Maimonides is gone, so is the family fortune, and suddenly there's also a big debt that now Maimonides will have to cover. Maimonides became physically ill, and he even wrote that he went into a depression for about a year. Maimonides thought that it was a sin to make money from religion. Although he was a rabbi, although he was a great rabbi and a great writer, he thought it would be inappropriate for him to make money this way. So at age 39, he had no choice but to become a physician to support his family and his brother's family that went down to repay the people and so on. So here he is at age 39 in Fustat, Egypt. That's, again, Fustat is Old Cairo, making a living as a physician. His name, his reputation, his knowledge became very clear to everybody in the area right away. At the time that Saladin the Great, the leader of the Muslim world and the king of Egypt, was away fighting the Crusader, a vizier that was in charge of the palace hired Maimonides to be his personal physician. He was so impressed that he later recommended him to be the personal physician of Saladin the Great, the leader of the Muslim world. Al-Kiti is a Muslim historian. Al-Kiti wrote that Richard the Lionheart, the leader of the Crusader of the Christian world, sent a letter to Maimonides asking him to be his personal physician. Remember, the Crusader came into the land of Israel, and the Muslims were fighting them. And they kind of switch hands who control. For this 100 years, this, and for this 200 years, that, and so on. So when you think about it, Richard the Lionheart, the leader of the Christian world, and Saladin the Great, the leader of the Muslim world, wanted Maimonides to be their personal physician. Obviously, Maimonides rejected the Christian world, Richard the Lionheart, the King of England, because he lived in Cairo, old Cairo, and he was already the personal physician of one side of Saladin the Great. If I was going, this is kind of like a little background about Maimonides, and we're going to get to his writing. If I'm going to use the PowerPoint presentation, I'll put that on the screen right now. But I guess I can tell you, rather than you focus on the screen and not see the other people. His first publication was when he was 33. He wrote the commentary on the Mishnah. Literally, every part of the Mishnah he commented on. The sixth tractate of the Mishnah, that was the foundation of the Gemara, that together with additions became the Talmud. That was his first publication. The next one was the Mishneh Torah. Mishneh Torah, the secondary Torah, or if you want, the first version of what we call today the Shulchan Aruch. And I'll explain the connection. Maimonides took all the laws available to this point, the Torah, the Mishnah, the Gemara, the Talmud, and everything that was published after, and codified everything into 14 sections that covered all the laws of Judaism. He missed nothing. Every single law of Judaism, written or oral, biblical or rabbinic, was covered in that book. More than one book, but you get my point. The only problem with it is that he didn't put references. So when he said, this is the law of this and that, there was no reference. Where did he get that from? He is the first one to take everything written and all the biblical laws and the oral laws and put them into a concise category, book, so to speak, that says you don't even need to look in the Talmud or in the Torah. If you want to know what the law about Shabbats are, here it is. If you want to know what the laws about sacrifices, here they are. If you want to know, it literally created all of it. The Shulchan Aruch that was written by Rabbi Yosef Karo in Tzfat, northern Israel, the Galilee, although it was published in Europe, it was written in Tzfat, literally took the writing of Maimonides and another writer that came after, and it published something similar called the Tur, and put together the Shulchan Aruch. So Maimonides already created a Shulchan Aruch, but he didn't create it with references. Karo, Rabbi Karo, did create it with references. That's what we use today. He also wrote the Guide to the Perplexed. The Guide to the Perplexed is still available in print. Actually, all of Maimonides' books are available in print, but those are religious books. You kind of make sense. The Guide to the Perplexed is a philosophical book. I read it in high school and I read it in college. I looked recently. You can find it on Amazon for $12.99. This is a long time ago that it was written. It was written in 1190, and it's still available more than 800 years later. There are even some books, The Guide to the Perplexed with explanation. I think they cost more, that you can buy today. You can go as soon as this is over on Amazon and buy them. The Guide to the Perplexed, and I'll come back to it and give more detail about it, is basically trying to explain the relationship between God and metaphysics. Metaphysics are the assumption or the underlining of philosophical theories. He's talking about religion, and he's talking about the philosophical approaches mostly of the Greek philosophers. I'll come back to it and we'll talk about it some more. there was a lot of criticism about this book, and I'll discuss it in a few minutes a little bit more. In addition to those three major publications, Maimonides wrote 700, a little over 700 papers on different topics that deal with religion, medicine, philosophy, etc. Some of those papers were several chapters long. One of those papers is 12 chapters long. So if you take those 700 papers, and let's say you take every 2 or 3 of them, maybe 4, and make a book out of them, which you can, you would have another 250 books to the name of Maimonides. This is how a prolific writer Maimonides was, at the same time that he was a physician. It's amazing. He's the most prolific writer of Jewish literature of all time. And there's literally nothing that he did not address religious-wise in his writing. Some of his writings and some of those letters, or some of those what's called postcard, Igeret, that he sent, like to the Jews of Yemen when they were under pressure to convert to Islam, are available today. It is amazing. Each and every one of his books still available more than 800 years later, and many of his papers are all available for somebody that wants to search for it. Another big thing that he wrote as part of his commentary on the Mishnah is the 13 Articles of Faith. We Jews don't have a creed. Muslims do, Christians do. In the ultra-Orthodox, I may even say the ultra-Orthodox part of Judaism, they believe that there is a creed to Judaism, and they call it the 13 Articles of Faith. I can, if you want, I can put that on the screen so you can see it. Let me see here. Oh, I lost it. These are them. This is the 13 articles. While you're looking at it, I'll tell you a couple of stories that kind of relate to the 13 articles of faith. If you attend a Sephardic synagogue.
Rabbi, we can't see it. You haven't shared it on the screen.
Oh. Let's see. I'm technically challenged. Can you see them now?
Yes.
Yeah, so that's the 13 articles of faith. And as you look at them, before I take them off the screen, I'll tell you a couple of stories about them. First of all, they were part of the commentary on the Mishnah, so they were not kind of standalone. On Passover, during the Seder, or actually toward the end of the Seder, when we sing, Echad mi yodea, one who knows, one I know, one is God, is that, for is that. The 13 is the 13 attributes of God's. Those are the 13 that Maimonides wrote. In Sephardic synagogue, let me take that off the screen so we can see each other. In Sephardic synagogue, on Friday night, the service ends with Igdal. Igdal Elohim Chai Ve'hi. In Ashkenazic synagogue, most of them, the service ends with Adon Olam Asher, right? So I grew up in a Sephardic synagogue in Israel. And when we went on Friday night, and it was the end of the service, and it got to the Igdal Elohim Chai, that was the time that pretty much everybody got up, started to shake each other's hands as they were walking out toward the door. I did not hear the second half of this song until much later in life. Because by the time we got to halfway through this song, we were already out the door on the way home. So In Judaism, there is no universally acceptable creed like in Islam and in Christianity. In Islam, there's something called the Shahada. La ilaha min Allah. There's no God but Allah. Muhammad is his prophet. I believe in angels. I believe in prophet. I believe in resurrection. I believe in jihad. In Christianity, there's a creed where I'm not an expert on Christianity or Islam, but you accept Jesus as the Lord and Savior, or you do the baptism, the immersion into water. We don't have such a thing. So there is no such thing in Judaism. Oh, I accept God as my God, and okay, welcome aboard. This doesn't happen. And that's a big difference to some extent between Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, or any other religion. Another major difference is that Judaism is the only religion or any set of belief, of faith, that the entire people witnessed. It's not somebody that came one day and say, I saw a supreme being, or I had a vision of a supreme being, and I'm starting a religion. The Torah tells us the entire people of Israel stood at the foot of Mount Sinai and received the Torah. And so that's like more than one witness. That's probably 1 million or 2 witnesses that stood there. And this is why we are a communal religion. And we don't have a direct one-on-one relationship. We even need a minyan to pray or to say Kaddish or to read Torah, etc. Let's switch gear. The impact of Maimonides so many years later. The power of words. Maimonides wrote a letter to his son, Avraham, and told him, once you articulate a word, once you say something, you cannot take it back. It's one of those things that stayed in Judaism. It was there before, and it's there now. Be very careful with what you say. Maimonides had a part of it. He called it the power of words. Charity, donation. Maimonides broke donations into 8 levels. It's almost like a ladder, and each step of this ladder is another one of those 8 levels. At the bottom, the lowest level of charity is when someone is telling you you have to, or you feel like you have to, and you give it not so willingly. You give the donation because you have to. That's like a charity of the hand. That's at the lowest bottom. Number 7 is when you give it anonymously. The person that gives the donation and the person that receives the donation are unknown to one another. You know what number 8 is, according to Maimonides? Number 8 is that when you fix that problem, when you fix that poverty, when you take that poor person and not just give him a donation so he or she can go buy food, you teach them a trade. You teach them how to do something that will allow them to make a living so they will not be poor anymore. That's the highest level of donation, charity, act of righteousness in Judaism, according to Maimonides. Issues of repentance. Maimonides said it's impossible not to commit sins. Sometimes we do it willfully, sometimes we do it unknowingly, sometimes we do it by accident, but everybody sins. And this is why repentance is so important. Anybody that thinks that they're not sinning is foolish or too arrogant, really. So this is how Maimonides looked at it. It looked at it, it's a good way for us to become better people simply by repenting. The issue of crime and punishment. Those are impacts that Maimonides left on Judaism. The Torah, at the simple form of it, say an eye for an eye. This is what you did, and this is how you're going to pay for it. And by the way, the same rule applies to property damage too. Oh, you killed my ox, you're going to give me an ox. Maimonides looked at it differently. The rabbis of the Talmud already dealt with this issue. And they say it's not an eye for an eye, because then everybody will have one eye. It's an eye for the monetary equivalent of an eye. That's how the rabbis of the Mishnah and the Gemara looked at it. Maimonides said, yes, but the person that suffered the damage can either partially or completely waive it, not ask any restitution. Or you can say, okay, give me something else instead. So not an ox for an ox or a cow for a cow. I don't need another cow. I have plenty. Give me something else. That's how he looked at it. He also said that the same law applied to the poor and to the rich, to the ignorant and to the well-educated. So everybody is equal under. I know today that seems like common sense and it's basic law, and we can argue whether it's applicable in our lives or not, but it's really the way laws are written. They apply to everybody the same. But that was not the case 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, or 3,300 years ago when the Torah was given. Some people had better privilege and they got away with certain things that other people couldn't. Friends. Maimonides said you should have 3 kinds of friends, which, by the way, follows the Mishnah, but they kind of had it a little bit different. He said you should have friends with benefits, not the kind of benefits you were thinking in your head right now. He considered friends with benefits something like a friendship. He also said you should have friends of satisfaction. That's probably what was in your mind when I said friends with benefits. That's like a husband and wife. That's your friend with satisfaction. But it's also the kind of friend that you can share secrets with. Doesn't have to be your spouse. It's a friend of satisfaction. And then he said the most important thing, which, by the way, the Mishnah agrees with, you should have friends for higher purpose, for Torah study, to ponder and debate issues of importance, to talk about Mishnah, to talk about Talmud. This is the really third type and most important thing. It wasn't for about 700 years later that Sigmund Freud, another Jew, kind of invented the field of psychology. But Maimonides dealt with a lot of those issues 700 years before Sigmund Freud even came up with those issues. You can find some of those things in the Guide to the Perplexed or in some of his writing. How did Maimonides see God? Maimonides said, we have the capacity to understand that there is God, but we don't have the capacity to understand what God is. When people read in the Torah things like the hand of God, or God spoke to Moses face to face, Maimonides said that's metaphor. To think that God has hands or face is a heresy. So yes, we can understand, or we have the mental capacity to understand there is God. We just don't understand what God is. And so we have this blind faith in God. Issues about laws and society. It's interesting. Mind you, this is 750 years ago, 800 years ago, so that Maimonides is talking about those things. He's saying that some people can kill their own child, and other people can't even kill a mosquito. So people are not the same. And therefore, we need leaders that understand that people are not the same and will apply law and rules across the board. He said some people have a tendency to look at uniformity of legislation. That's actually what we would look today as the legislator. Some people have a need to enforce law. That's what we call today government. And some people have a tendency to be judgmental or to judge law, and that's what we call today the judiciary branch of our government. So legislator, government, and judiciary, the three branches of our government, and most really advanced society governments that are not ruled by tribal law or something like that, or chaos, use the same thing Maimonides spoke about 750 years ago. Shabbat. Maimonides said we observe Shabbat for essentially two reasons. One is to affirm and confirm creation. When we confirm creation, we basically confirm the existence of God. I'll come back to the issue of creation because Maimonides addressed it in the Guide to the Perplexed. The second reason we observe Shabbat is because of the Exodus from Egypt, to remind us of the Exodus from Egypt. There's an issue that Maimonides addressed that was really a thorn in the side of the Jews at the time that he was writing those things, some 750, 800 years ago. The Karaim, the Karaites. The Karaim in Hebrew, or Karaites in English, is a sect within Judaism. There are about 25,000 Karaim living in the world. 20,000 of them live in Israel, and 5,000 of them live around Fremont, California, near San Francisco. Don't ask me how they got there. That's where they are. I know when I was in high school, one of the girls in my class was a Karaite. I knew her as Sonia. During the reunion, some 30 years later, she said her name was Susan. Nevertheless, all of the Karaim used to live in Alexandria, Egypt. In some sense, they were actually turning Jews in on different reasons of, oh, they're not loyal to the king or what have you. The Karaim accept only the written Torah, the Mikra. That's what it is. The Karaim accept only the written Torah. They called us rabbinic Jews because we follow the teaching of the rabbis, the Mishnah, the Talmud, the Shulchan Aruch, etc. For the Karaim, the only laws that apply religiously is Jewish law. Here's a classical example. The Torah said, don't boil a kid, a baby goat, in the milk of his mother. The rabbis understood it on different level, right? Morally and otherwise, in kind of concentric circles. They say, okay, it's probably really immoral to take the baby kid that was just born, the baby goat that was just born, and boil it in the milk that his mother produced. And so you go to the next circle and said, well, if it's not good for the goat, it's not good for the sheep, it's not good for the cow and the calf, the sheep and the lamb. Well, then let's go another circle. How do we know which milk came from the mother in relation to the calf or to the lamb? So they banned mixing of cheese or dairy and meat. Don't ask me about chicken. That's a whole different issue because chickens don't produce milk, but that's for another day. We'll talk about it some other time. It looks like, chicken meat looks like, so the rabbis banned it. The Karaim don't follow rabbinic law. They only follow the laws of the Torah. So for the Karaim, they will not eat goat meat with dairy. But if the beef is kosher and the milk is kosher, cheeseburger is perfectly okay to eat. Chicken Parmesan, if the chicken is kosher and the milk is kosher, is perfectly okay to eat. That's just a classical example Adekaraim are different, although they're sect in Judaism. In the old days, a Karaim that wanted to marry what they called rabbinic Jews, the rest of us, had to convert to Judaism, even though they're Jews. That's not the case anymore. The rabbinate in Israel says that the Karaim are Jews. They do not need to convert to Judaism. So in Israel, if Sonia, or later on as Susan, my classmate, wanted to marry one of my classmates who's not a Karaim, she would not have to convert, nor he would have to convert to Karaim. Maimonides looked at them in spite of the animosity that was going between the Jews of Alexandria and the Karaim of Alexandria as people that we should treat with respect and honor. And if one of them dies, we should go to the Shiva. And if one of them needs a minyan or a group of them need a minyan, we should go there. We should counsel them. He looked at them just like regular Jews. And that was not the case for most of the rabbis. Let's talk about another subject Maimonides put an impact on Judaism. It's a misnomer of sort, converts to Judaism. Maimonides looked at a Jew by choice as a Jew. No exception. No exception between me, who were born to Jewish parents, and someone that became a Jew, chose to become a Jew. Halacha, by the way, say that once a person becomes a Jew, we are forbidden from even reminding this person that he or she are a Jew by choice. Forbidden. Can't even bring it up. A convert to Judaism, a Jew by choice. I say it just because in English, that's how it goes. I'll come back to it in a second. There's no word for it in Hebrew. But a person that became a Jew named Ovadia, servant of God, Abdallah in Arabic, wrote a letter to Maimonides and say, when I stand at the Amidah and I say, Avinu, Eloi Avinu, right? Our father and the father of our fathers and forefather. He said, my father and grandfather and beyond that were not Jews. Can I still say that praying? Eloheinu ve'Eloi avotenu, our God and God of our forefather. Can I still say it? The Jew by choice said. And Maimonides said, yes. Abraham, the first Jew 4,000 years ago, brought many other people into Judaism and essentially was their spiritual father. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are the spiritual fathers of many nations, many religions. So Maimonides said, yes, you can say that. You can say that when you pray because you are a descendant of Abraham, the spiritual father of humanity, or at least of the major religions, the Abrahamic religion. I'll take a little step aside and tell you, the Torah refers to somebody that is in the process of becoming a Jew, ger, stranger. And the reason they call it ger is because in biblical time, you only lived with your own people. Nobody just came to live with you in your own town, your own village, unless they were in the process of becoming a Jew. They didn't just come to live with you. They were not servant or slaves. The Torah referred to them differently. And so there is a name for somebody that is in the process of becoming a Jew, according to the Torah, ger. In the Orthodox community, they call it ger tzedek, a righteous stranger. But once you become a Jew, you're a Jew. There is no words in Hebrew that I know of for somebody that completed the process. Nobody calls anybody a Jew by choice in Hebrew. It's just a Jew. You're a convert in the process of. And by the way, the word convert in English can be better translated to mumar in Hebrew, which is somebody that converts out of Judaism. Somebody that converts into Judaism is just a Jew. No other words for it, no other name. Why did Maimonides, in the Guide to the Perplexed, I told you that hour will not be enough. Hopefully you can stay a little longer. Why did he choose to write and comment so much about the Greek philosopher, Aristotle primarily? First of all, Maimonides was a philosopher, just as much as he was a physician, just as much as he was a writer, just as much as he was a rabbi. And to understand the process why he chose those philosophers rather than other philosophers, like of the Muslim world at the time, we have to go into the Torah. In the Torah, in Genesis, it says that Shem and Yefet will dwell together in the same tent. Shem and Yefet were two sons of Noah. We are associated with Shem, Sem. 150 years ago, a German philosopher coined the phrase anti-Semite, descendant of Shem, Sem, the son of Noah, we, the Jews. Yefet is in the Torah, the one that is the son of Noah, is associated with the Greek. And since the Torah said that Shem and Yefet will dwell together, the rabbi said, that's okay. The rabbis of the Mishnah said, it's okay to translate the Torah into any language. There's the Septuagint to Greek, there's the Onkelos translation to Aramaic, and many other translation, right? Even English today, many different versions of it. But Rabbi Gamliel said, no, we can only translate the Torah into Greek. Because Greek, again, Shem and Yefet should dwell together. The word Yefet, the name Yefet, means also beauty. And so the rabbi looked at it as, it's a beautiful language, we should be associated with it, and we should translate the Torah to it. And therefore, Maimonides understood from this that we should also comment on their philosophers, philosophy, languages, etc. I take it most of you, given that it's a well-educated group, know about the translation into Greek. Ptolemy, the Egyptian king, took 72 elder Jews, put them separately, didn't tell them about the other people, and said, translate the Torah to Greek. And they did. And they all came up exactly with the same translation. Rabbi Gamliel saw it as a miracle. How can 72 people translate the Torah exactly the same, word for word, when they did not collude with one another? This is especially because many Hebrew words can have different meaning, and you can translate them in different meaning. I'll give you the most classical example. In Genesis, the Torah said, Naaseh Adam betzalmenu bedmutenu. Let us make a man in our image, in our likeness. Do you know how those 72 people, elders, translated that verse? I shall make a person in my image, in my likeness. How is this possible? This is why Rabban Gamliel saw it as an inspiration from God upon those 72 elders, and therefore a miracle. By the way, since most of the Anglo-Saxon language experts knew Greek more than they knew Hebrew, they translated initially the Bible into English or French or Spanish from the Greek translation, which we know is not exactly accurate. In recent years, or years after, they started to translate it based upon the Hebrew version of it that is slightly different. It's not I shall make a man in my image and likeness. It's we shall, let us make. The Guide to the Perplexed, I'm going to try to touch on it. In Hebrew, it's called Mavo Nevuchim, More Nevuchim. It's basically a letter, a three-part letter that Maimonides wrote to one of his students. And later, those three letters, those three parts later, became a book. You can buy it online, like I said, even today. It's available. When it's done, go check online just to see. It's amazing. It's more than just a philosophical book. we try to explain some things that are different and are common between Judaism or the philosophy of Judaism and the Greek philosophy. Here's a classical example. Aristotle believed that in the uniformity of the universe and in intelligence, creation of the universe. Maimonides, clearly a rabbi, a devout Jewish man, believed that God created the earth and the universe and everything else during the creation. How do you gap those two bridges? And Maimonides in that book was trying to find, in that guide, was trying to find a common ground between them. Maimonides explained that the word Bereshit, the first word of the Torah, that we mostly translate at the beginning, can also be read in Hebrew, Bereshit, in intelligence. So when you hear today about the argument between the creation and intelligent creation, Maimonides said 800 years ago, 750 years ago, that at the beginning, it's possible that intelligence was created and everything followed. That's a way he found to gap or to close that gap between Aristotle and how he believed in the Torah. Just an example. He also talked about issues that are very controversial. Many rabbis asked for a copy of this book, and other rabbis burnt it. Because other rabbis looked at it, it's like, what? One, you're dealing with the Greek philosophers, wrong. Two, you're telling us that it's really not Bereshit as in at the beginning, but rather in intelligence. So there was controversy. Controversy also sell books. So maybe that's one of the reasons his book, this guide to the Perplexed, was so popular, right? Because he, in addition to showing the obvious, this is my belief and this is Aristotle's belief, here's a common ground between the two of them. He also talked about prophets. He said only Moses spoke face to face to God. Only Moses spoke to God. All the other prophets had a vision or had a dream and then transmitted that message. No one except for Moses spoke to God. Everybody else outside of Moses simply had an image or a vision or a dream. And that's how it is. That's how they came up with it. This was puzzling to many rabbis. It's like Isaiah is speaking about this, and Ezekiel is speaking about this, etc. Maimonides also in this book, Moreh Nevuchim, the Guide to the Perplexed, explain how God tests people. He gave example of Abraham and Isaac, the binding of Isaac, and he gave an example of Job, how they're being tested. And by that, he infer also how we're being tested throughout life with things and how we should deal with this. Maimonides dealt in this book also with the mystical element of Judaism. I didn't know until years later, but when I was a child, because my mom's dad was studying the Zohar every day, and they were raising me part of the time because my dad was in the military, my mom was working. I asked him to teach me the Zohar, and he said, when you get to age 40. I didn't understand it until many years later that I found that Maimonides said that. Maimonides said, you should not study mysticism, Kabbalah, until you hit 40. And the assumption was that by that point, you have a complete grasp of the Torah, the Mishnah, the Talmud, and everything else. So now you can base mysticism on those teachings that you got already. Maimonides also talked about Sfirot. Those of you who attended the class on Kabbalah or are familiar with Kabbalah, there are 10 Sfirot. I'm not going to get into it because it's going to take us into Kabbalah. That's a different. And I want to finish because I literally just hit 1 hour. I'm looking at my watch here. He also talked about the 613 commandments of the Torah. The Talmud said there are 613 commandments in the Torah, but no one listed them. Maimonides was the first one to list them. And he broke them into 14 categories, so 613, and he explained the purpose for those categories, like the sacrifices or some pragmatic approach, some physical approach to commandment, and things of that nature. Clearly, not enough time. I've spoke as fast as I can, while still hoping that you'll grasp some of those things. But there's a lot. There's just too much. Maybe we needed a weekend to talk about Maimonides. When he died at age 69, he didn't want to be buried in Egypt. So today Maimonides is buried in Tiberias, right by the Sea of Galilee. And many people, especially among Sephardic Jews and Orthodox Jews, Ashkenazic and otherwise, go and visit his grave quite often because his impact on Judaism was just beyond belief, not just in the sense that he was the most prolific writer, but also in the sense that so many of his writings have lasting impact in prayers that we say every day, on Shabbat, on holidays, etc. I'd be happy to answer some question, and thank you very much for listening.
Rabbi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I wanted to ask, what was Maimonides influenced by the Arab culture around him? And do we see any of that influence in his writings?
Yes and yes. He wrote the Guide to the Perplexed in Arabic using Hebrew alphabet. The only book he wrote in Hebrew, that is to say that everything else he wrote in Arabic, was the Mishneh Torah. So it tells you that since he lived most of his life either under Arabic control or within Arab countries, Morocco, Tunisia, and Egypt, and under the Arabic control in Spain, under the Umayyad Caliphate, and in the land of Israel, it was a big influence. Most of his writings, those 700 papers that I spoke about, and his books, most of them were written in Arabic. The book, The Guide to the Perplexed, is available in Arabic. There is a translation into Arabic. So clearly, they know who he was, and yet they allow it. Most of the Arab countries have censorship. You don't find many Hebrew books over there or Jewish books over there, but you can find it in Arabic.
So do you see any influence that the Arabic culture had upon Maimonides in his writing, in his concepts?
Yes, within limit. His first and foremost writing came from Jewish belief, but he never forgot where he lived. He, by the way, said that it's a sin to live in Egypt. Once we left Egypt 3,300 years ago, it's a sin to live there, which is one of the reasons he didn't want to be buried in Egypt. But he had no choice. He couldn't live in the land of Israel, and they kept kicking him out of North Africa. Egypt was the only place he was accepted. And he got a job at the palace, right, as a physician. So he was working at the palace during the day as a physician, coming home, tending to people for free that needed medical help, and then writing. I don't know when this guy slept because he wrote so much. But really, the short answer is yes, he lived in it, he wrote in it, it influenced him as well. Thank you, Ria. Yeah, Linda, please unmute.
Why couldn't he live in Israel? I guess I missed that if you mentioned it.
The Crusader didn't allow it, made it very difficult. His brother could not do business. They didn't allow it. And so they moved to Egypt. They literally were gypsies for a good 20 years. Cordova, Spain, throughout Spain, Fez, Morocco, Sfax, Tunisia, Akko, Israel, Jerusalem, Israel, and then finally into Egypt, where he would stay the rest of his life. That's why he couldn't. It was difficult for them. Any other questions? Well, thank you very much for the time, and thank you for the courtesy and for being here. It's always a pleasure to share knowledge, as little as I have.
Oh,
I
my.
often tell my congregants, knowledge is useless if you don't share it. So thank you
That's
for
right.
giving me the opportunity.
You have so much to share. You are really a wealth of history on so many levels. Thank you for being here. I look forward to talking to you about the next time you come back and teach this group. It's always a joy to learn from you. And several people have mentioned to me, by the way, that they watch